Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Erickson from Tech Elevator. And today's talk is about how to learn to code for beginners, which is going to be a talk that is mainly centered around how adults learn than it is necessarily around code, although all of the lessons certainly apply to that and is a great, basically giving you a roadmap on how you can approach your learning to code. There's a lot of good resources out there that we'll be talking about too at the end, and we'll be taking questions after the talk. Talk should last about half an hour, and we'll have a nice QA session. If you have a question during the talk, feel free to throw it into the QA box. I believe at the bottom there's a little Q&A button you can click. You can throw a question in there. Andrea is also on the call. She might be able to immediately answer it in text, but if not, we'll be answering these live at the end. And so, feel free to throw anything down there that you have, whether it's about a certain topic I'm talking about, or even a certain sort of learn to code piece that you have. There's also a chat room, but I think that Andrea is mainly going to be watching that QA box, so put it down in there. There will be a recording of this video after this is all done, so if you have to drop out, if you know someone who might be interested in seeing this after it's all done, we're going to be having it up on our YouTube channel and on our Learn to Code page at techelevator.com. So feel free to go over there and check that out. We'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, who am I? I am Joe Erickson. I'm a senior software engineer at Tech Elevator, which is a 14-week boot camp. We have sort of 6 locations around the area, and we'll be running a remote learning session pretty soon. So I've sort of updated some of these notes around remote learning and around, how do you stay motivated yourself? I have been a sort of a web developer since about 1998. I was basically hired out of high school. I was in college for a year. I had made a couple of GeoCities pages on Microsoft Word, and no one else had that skill. So that was actually pretty in demand at the time. So I got hired on to do that and just sort of like kept learning, and kind of ended up where I am now. I did eventually get a computer science degree in college. I can't say that all of those classes were relevant to what I'm doing now, but it was certainly interesting. I have worked at Tech Elevator first as an instructor in Cleveland, teaching the Java classes, and then as a curriculum designer, where I actually wrote a lot of the curriculum, what the students were going to be learning, sort of how the exercises were going to run. And through all of that, kind of part of my role was studying how learning happens, especially for adult students. Adult students have sort of a different learning style than children and high school and elementary school. And so sort of figuring out what are the best practices for that around sort of knowledge retention and actually applying the knowledge that you learn and things like that. So I'm going to focus on that today. Today's main thing is around sort of, this is a how to learn to code, not necessarily a what to learn to code. So I'm sort of looking now at what are some basic plans that you can set down for learning how to code. There's so many tutorials out there. There's so many lessons. There's so much stuff out there. And trying to dive into all of it and piecemealing everything and little by little won't get you very far. It'll be helpful to follow a couple of road plans that I'm going to lay out. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the philosophy first, talk about why learning is important, especially if you're looking to get into technology. My whole life, I am not using the same technologies now that I was when I started. You have to continually learn and pick up new things pretty quickly and be able to apply them to situations that you're working in. So we're going to sort of talk about that. We're going to talk about how do you decide what to learn. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff out there. How do you pick through it and pick what you want to learn? And then how do you decide how to learn? What are some approaches and things to keep in mind as you're going through to sort of figure this out? So really in technology, learning is the thing that you will be doing constantly if you get into this sort of work. There is the stuff that I was doing in '98 is completely different than the stuff that I am doing now, which is different than the stuff I was doing 10 years ago. There's constantly new technologies coming out. There's constantly new layers being added to previous technologies you had. And one thing that has really helped me to get through this and to figure this out is figuring out how to learn efficiently. I want to learn sort of in the quickest way possible, but that also has the most application to real world problems that I'm doing. And that is a constant throughout my job. It's basically my job. That and being able to Google really well is my job. So one thing that I've learned through all of this is that learning is mostly mental. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? But it's also emotional. Learning has a lot to do more, I think, with morale than with just trying to cram something in your head. Cramming works really well when you have an exam the next day. It doesn't work really well when you have to remember this stuff, 3 weeks or 2 years from now. And so there's a lot of times when I have had students go through Tech Elevator and there's this constant feeling that they're not good enough, that they can't pick this stuff up, that they're stupid and they haven't been able to do this. This is actually a very common thing with adult learners. As an adult, at this point, you are now pretty good at certain things. You are competent in certain areas. And then when you get into some place where you know nothing and you have no idea what's going on, but other people seem to, you start to feel stupid. And that is a mental game that you have to win in order to sort of get into actually learning all the time. You are going to run into things that you have no clue about. You can't beat yourself down for that. You have to just say, okay, I don't know this. I will keep doing this, and eventually I will learn it. I think a lot of times people start learning something and they get to a stage where they give up. And it's better to sort of push through that and to know that you can eventually do something. You've done it before. You've learned other stuff. You've learned how to walk. You didn't beat yourself up about that when you were a baby because you didn't know to. And now that you do know to, it actually gets in your way more than it actually helps you. So really that's the first part. And how do we help with that? Well, there's this quote that I found in Harvard Business Review that talked about, of all the things that can boost emotions, motivation, perceptions during a workday, the single most important is making progress in meaningful work. And I actually think that making progress is great, but seeing the progress is way more important. Small wins really matter. If you can sort of make incremental progress and be able to point back to things that say, yes, I didn't know that last week, but now I do know it, which means this thing I'm struggling with now, I will know that in a week. And understanding what your progress is really important. So one of the things that we do with students is they're constantly being bombarded every day with stuff they don't know. And that can start to feel like you don't know anything. But usually, about midway through the course, if they're still beating themselves up over something like that, we usually point back to like week 1. Hey, remember when you learned a raise and you had no idea what that was? Like, how do you feel about them now? Like, you know it. Of course you know it. You're going to know this thing in about 3 weeks, right? You just have to keep moving forward and keep making progress. So looking back at things that you've done previously, super important to do. Things that you've sort of learned before and now you know, that's really important too. So you really need to stay aware of your progress. So that's kind of rule number 1 for learning. You have to understand the progress you're making. This is pretty easy in something like painting. You can look back at paintings that you've done, look at paintings you're doing now and seeing, oh, this is much better than that was. It's kind of harder to do with coding because a lot of it's kind of virtual. It's on your computer. You don't really get to see it that much. But try and understand the things that you're learning and be able to go back and say, okay, let me do some problems that I worked on before. Let me do them now. And let me see how easy they seem. Because at the time, they might have felt impossible. And you do them now, and they're actually, you can do them. They might not be easy, but you can do them. That's a good way to sort of measure progress in coding. So that's rule number one. Now let's talk about how do we learn. Like I said, developing curriculum for Tech Elevator, I spent a lot of time figuring out how do people learn. And one of the ways that I found that really helped me understand this a lot better is this idea of the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, which you can look up on Wikipedia. It's a real thing. And this is sort of an exploration of what are the stages that people go through and what are the important parts of those stages as you learn something. And so sort of the stages of this are pretty straightforward. First, you're a novice. You know nothing about the topic. So the first time you are introduced to it, you have no idea what's going on, but it looks interesting, right? So you start digging into it. Once you get some of the basic ideas around it, you sort of move into the beginner stage. And I'll talk about these stages in depth in a minute and sort of what you can take away from these as you go through. So once you go to beginner, if you stick with it and you keep going, you'll eventually be competent, meaning you could actually kind of do something, or at least there's this thing that you can do over and over again, and you start to get pretty good at that. Once you do that for a while and gain even more experience, you become proficient. And then, of course, if you keep going for a lot longer, then you become an expert. And so these stages are pretty important for how you learn. Each one sort of has a different mode that you get into when you're learning. And so I'm going to talk about all of those, but importantly, part of this is to understand where you are in the learning process. So if you think of these stages as the process you're moving through, it's very important to know get a feel for which stage you're at. So let's talk about those stages. So I'm going to sort of work through each one and what's the best approach for learning in each one of these. So first is the Novus stage. Novus means that you know nothing about this topic. You are what is considered unconsciously incompetent. You really have no idea how bad you are, but you see someone doing it, it looks cool, you decide maybe I'll try this too. So you really, at this stage, you don't know what you don't know. You sort of walked up to two people playing chess and, oh, it's a game. And they're kind of moving pieces. That looks neat. Maybe I'll try this. But other than that, you have really no concept of what's going on. And so what you have to do at this stage is you have to learn the very basics of what you're doing. And in fact, not just learning the basics, but you're learning the concepts around this stuff. So what are the ideas that are inherent in this thing that you're learning? So you're trying to build sort of a mental model of what's happening. In programming, this is specifically around things like when you're going through our program, we are really trying to not necessarily focus on the languages that you're learning, but on what are the concepts that you have here. So there's the concept of a variable. A variable is something that can hold data, but what does that mean? What's a data type? Why are there different types of data? How does that factor into an array? Arrays are very hard for people to understand. Having done it for so long, I kind of intuitively know this stuff, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a mental model and a structure to think about a lot of these things as you go through. And that starts with really just doing the basic stuff. So you really want to learn the what and the how. So what are the keywords that I'm typing in here, and how does it work? How does a loop work? What are the different processes that are happening here, so that I can try to start understanding what the tools are before I can really apply it to any problem that I have. And so a lot of the ways that you're going to do this at this stage is find a tutorial and something that has step-by-step instructions. You're not going to get into coding by just trying to like build a project. You're going to get into coding by finding a sort of step-by-step manual that tells you how to build a project that's already been built. That is super important to try and find those pieces and start off by doing that sort of thing. More importantly, don't read the documentation for the language that you're looking at, because that's too much. There's way too much there to understand everything that's going on with something. So you don't jump right into documentation. You need to go find a tutorial that's going to walk you through this. And that could be a video, that could be a website or online. Free Code Camp is a great place to sort of like learn the step-by-steps for JavaScript. There's a lot of other types of things. We have someone at Tech Elevator, Dan Vega. If you go to techelevator.com, we have a Learn to Code page now where he is posting videos on sort of how to build things. Last I talked to him, he was doing this sort of step-by-step approach. And so also what you want to do is you want to learn from those who are a little ahead of you, unless they've been trained in teaching. So if you know someone that's been doing web programming for 20 years, don't try and learn from them, because the gap between expert and novice is so far apart that the expert doesn't understand what the novice doesn't get anymore. Everything just makes sense to the expert. And so it's hard to sort of pick up learning from them. Much better that if you know someone who is picking up coding, or someone who is, you know, just maybe a year ahead of you in learning, to go and learn from them. Getting a mentor in that way is actually a pretty good idea to sort of bring you along in that. Also, you want to focus on a technology. Just focus on one thing. There are a lot of tutorials out there that will just do one thing, but there's also a lot of tutorials out there that are like, hey, we're going to teach you JavaScript and Vue and TypeScript and Sass and Beautify in this one tutorial. And that's too much. You need to sort of pick out one technology and focus on that. Like I said, Free Code Camp does a really good job of this around JavaScript or Python or HTML, CSS. They really focus in on the one thing. And so they have a lot of good sort of step-by-steps to go through in order to do that. So that's really important to remember for novices, is you really have to focus on the one thing, because what you're going to learn a technology, but more importantly, you're going to learn the concepts behind that technology that then you can apply to something else. So there's plenty of time to pick up something else later. Right now, just focus on one thing. Once you do this for a while, you're going to sort of move up to a beginner status. You're going to start to understand sort of what's going on here, what these tools are and how you might be able to apply them to problems. So you're going to start learning the where. Like, where can I just learned this thing and I did it 5 times here. Where can I apply this in another project or in another way? And that is pretty important part to start looking into. The best way to do that is to screw up. You're gonna, instead of following the step-by-step, at some point, maybe you say, you know what, I bet I could make it do this if I did this piece. Try it. You might completely mess it up. That's fine. That means that way didn't work. And that starts to sort of focus in that mental model that you have about these tools that you're learning. To a great extent, this is a lot like exploring in the dark. You're sort of feeling around, you're feeling the walls, you're feeling the furniture, and your brain is sort of mapping out everything that's going on. So yeah, you're gonna stub your toe sometimes, but then you're gonna realize, oh, there's something there I don't want to keep stubbing my toe on, and you're gonna figure that out. And the way you do that is by taking some of these tutorials and modifying them. You ran through a piece that sort of built you a little to-do application, and you start to wonder, I wonder how can I get it so that I can like reorder these, or how can I get it so I can add a new one? And just start trying to modify these tutorials. So you're staying a little bit on sort of the training wheels or the track that you're on, but every once in a while you sort of step off and you try something out and you see if you can get that to work instead. Another thing is once you do the tutorials, take those same concepts and the same ideas, but make a different project with it. Instead of a to-do list, make like a Twitter clone, right? That has a list of sort of text fields, but something that's brand new that you're doing that is not directly following a tutorial. You can always go back and reference the tutorial to see, how did I do that thing? How did I do this thing? But you're starting to branch out and being a little bit looser with that. This is the stage where you're hitting conscious incompetence. You're starting to realize how bad you are at this. This is a normal part of the process that you realize, man, I am not good at this programming thing. That's okay. This, however, is usually what is called like the dip. This is the part where people drop out. People give up. Maybe you say, well, okay, maybe that's not for me. Let me go start over again with this other thing. And you keep resetting yourself back to neutral. So there's a couple different avenues you could take here. One is to give up. One is to never look at this again and figure, okay, this is it. I'm not cut out for this because I am obviously really bad at it. Without realizing, of course, that yes, you have to be really bad at it. You have to be really bad at it before you're good at it. The other step that you could take is that you could go back. So this is, like I said, maybe you're learning JavaScript and it's just frustrating. You're realizing how bad you are at this. And so you're like, you know what? JavaScript's not for me. Let me go look at Python. And to a certain degree, what you're doing is you're setting yourself back to square one and then trying to learn Python. And then you hit a stage where you're like, oh, I'm really bad at this too. Let me put that aside. Let me learn Ruby. And you sort of like jump from tutorial to tutorial and from language to language, and you never really make progress. You can't advance until you're willing to get uncomfortable with how you're doing, until you're willing to win that mental game that I talked about before, and willing to see the progress you are making in order to help you make the progress that you need to make right now. Practice is really the only thing that's going to get you there. So, a lot of this is you get real frustrated about this stuff, but in learning, frustration is like sore muscles. If you're working out and you have sore muscles, that means it's working. That means you're doing the right thing. This is the same idea. If you're getting frustrated, that means, okay, I'm on the right track. There's something here that I don't know and I'm learning it. You just need to keep going with that. And so the third option, the best option, is to push through that. Let it be super frustrating and keep putting in the practice that you need to make this work. And in all of this, like I said, as far as, keep track of your progress so that you know what's going on. So once you get through some of this stuff, you start to actually be able to apply some of these tools to new problems. And that's sort of when you enter the competent realm. You're not an expert yet. This doesn't come easy, but at least you're able to do something with it. This is really the stage of junior developers. This is the stage we try and get our students to before they get hired somewhere. Because you can at least do something in the language, and you're primed to keep learning. You've gotten over the big hump of realizing how bad you are, and you're ready to really start learning here. So this is the stage where you kind of maybe get into a little bit of paid work, or you work on a large personal project. What you want to do with paid work, the idea is that you start applying your lessons that you have to things that you haven't even thought of before, right? This is someone else's idea, and you're trying to see how you can sort of work with that and sort of apply the things that you have into this new thing. And that helps build this mental model that you have in your head of how all this stuff works. Large project can do that too. So if you find a project online that you just keep building on, right? So if you built a Twitter clone, you could just keep on adding features and features and features and features and keep going with that. This is where you enter the realm of conscious competence. Every once in a while, you're like, oh, maybe I do know something about this. That might not be constant. It's not constant conscious competence, but it is something that you can have glimpses of once you reach this stage. And here you're trying to find the why. Why do certain things work? Why do I have to do it this way? You don't want to really think about those things before this. You really want to follow the step-by-step tutorials. But here you can start to maybe piece apart like what's going on behind the scenes to get things to work. And that helps, again, build this idea of how these things are working. It's important here, and maybe even a little bit earlier, to get a mentor. Get someone who can give you those ideas to branch you off into other things, to help you sort of, when you run into a problem, to be able to give you sort of a way to figure out your own solution. And then you'll start to even learn that problem-solving piece as well, which is important. Also teach. If you have a blog, write blog posts about what you're doing. Try and write your own tutorials. Try and sort of branch out from just doing it yourself to actually teaching it. The process of taking these mental models that you've built up, these ways that things work, and actually then explaining them back into English is almost a sort of programming. It's a programming back into English or whatever language you decide to write these in. And that in itself helps solidify a lot of what's going on with these programs. Then, of course, you get into, with sufficient practice and more experience, once you get paid work, you're sort of learning on the job at that point. This gets you into proficient and expert status, which I sort of just grouped together here because once you get here, you've kind of made it, right? This is when you are unconsciously competent. This is where you can't explain to novices anymore how an array works because it just works. It's an array. It does the thing. And so, this is the goal, obviously, at the end of it all. So obviously, rule number 3, you want to learn at the level you're at. So figure out what level you're at, and then use these tips to sort of learn at the level you're at. Now, a big caveat here, you don't just like hit expert and then you know everything about technology. Usually you're working in a couple of different technologies, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, maybe Java, maybe Python, and you're going to be at like different levels in all of those, right? So you're just going to have to sort of remember for each stage, for each technology, you're going to be at sort of a different stage. You just want to figure out what that is and try and work with that. So what's the game plan? So the game plan is, first of all, and we tell our students this on day 1, mentally prepare to fail. Mentally prepare to be frustrated about this. That's how this works. You're going to sort of dive into things that you don't know nothing about, and you're not going to do very well with it, right? So you can either struggle and complain and throw things and yell and scream and hate every minute of it, or you can struggle. So the struggle you kind of have to do. All the other stuff, all the hate that you throw around at yourself because you're not getting it fast enough, that's all optional. You don't have to do that part. You could just say, Joe told me. That's fine, do that. It's gonna be hard. You're gonna not do it so well. So go with that and mentally prepare to be able to do that. Again, start with a tutorial. If you want to learn how to program on the web, start with the JavaScript tutorial. Just go through a basic JavaScript lesson on Free Code Camp or whatever your favorite coding resource is, and just sort of go through all of those lessons. Start working on some of the sample problems that they have. Try and take the lessons that you learned and apply them to actual problems that you haven't seen before. That's why a lot of those exercises are on there. The exercises are important. You can't just read. It's like bodybuilding. You can't just read about bodybuilding and then boom, you're done, right? I mean, look at me. But if you have to actually put in the work. You have to put in the exercises. You have to really work on the actual coding aspects of that. And there's a lot of really great resources out there for that. Find the frustration. Once you get frustrated about something, once something is too hard for you, that's when you know you're in the right place. Keep going. Stay in that spot. Don't retreat from that and then start over again somewhere else. You'll never make progress forward if you keep doing that. So try and find the part where you're frustrated about and just like keep doing it. Now, that doesn't mean like you keep doing it until you burn out. Sleep is important. Sleep is actually really important for learning. And so try and, you can take breaks. Taking breaks is fine. You don't have to stay frustrated. In fact, a lot of times when I'm working on a problem, if I'm working on it late at night, and I just say, you know what, I'm going to stop here and go to sleep, I usually wake up the next morning and I have the answer. I don't know how it works, but I now rely on it enough that I'm sort of happy that I kind of am frustrated. Because then I know I can put it all away, my unconscious mind will solve the problem, and I'll come back to work the next day and there it'll be. So that's, try that out. Ask questions, and more importantly, ignore the trolls. It's okay to not know things. There's a lot of sites and forums out there that act like you're an idiot for asking basic questions. Reddit. And so don't hang around that place. Leave that forum. Go find some place that actually does want sort of these beginner questions. It's okay to start off at this. You don't have to know everything, and you shouldn't be expected to know everything. So find some place that is supportive. Find a place that is actually going to help you with that, because there are places out there that do, and you don't need to hang out with people that are just there to beat you down so that they can feel better about themselves. Get a mentor if you can, if you know someone. There are a number of places online that you can join up to. I was planning on looking them up and I forgot before this session. But some of those forums that you have, if there's someone on there that's really helpful, send them a note. Ask them, hey, I'm running through JavaScript right now. Do you have any suggestions? Can I throw some problems your way and have you look at them? Technology people actually really like helping people getting into the profession. So that could be a way to do that. Get small wins. Find a way to win. Work on real small projects. Add real small features to existing projects. Start small and go from there. And then learn one main thing. Like I said, learn JavaScript. And once you have JavaScript and you've built a couple of things with it, start to look and see what are some other things around here, right? If you heard that, oh, you should learn React, don't learn React. Learn JavaScript first, and then learn some HTML and CSS, and then maybe move to something like React. You really need to start with something that you can win at, that is small, that there are tutorials for that you can go through, and then start branching out from there. And that's really going to help you sort of further what you're doing there. And also show what you learned. Like I said, there's start a blog, right? There's a good blog called dev.to, dev2. There's so many posts on there. It's a blog that you can go in there and you can post stuff, and you can post the most basic things and everybody will cheer for you. It really is a good site for sort of getting the stuff that you are working on out there. And it helps that teaching part, right? You're taking some lessons that you've learned and then you're rewriting them in your words. And it's okay if it's basic stuff. There are people out there that are right behind you that need that basic stuff in order to advance themselves. So, take what you are learning and try and then teach it to other people. And if you kind of follow those pieces, this is actually, it's a pretty good game plan for getting into and learning about technology. That's basically the presentation. So I don't know if we have any questions or not, if you have questions that you want to ask, but Andrea, do we have anything?